and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the views and thinking that I have around governance, and perhaps particularly how that might focus and work within systems thinking. My background has been in leisure operations. I started as a casual lifeguard back in the 1500s, I think it was. So it's probably about 1986, somewhere around there. And I worked through a number of different roles in local authorities and trusts. And I was the founding chief executive of Halo Leisure, which is a trust that operates in Herefordshire, mainly in Herefordshire and Bridgend. I was also National Partnerships Director for GLL, and my role there was doing work around mergers and acquisitions and creating group structures and innovative ways of sharing expertise and knowledge and so on. But it was also actually working to see how GLL as a partner operator would be able to work more effectively with local authorities, our partner local authorities. So I spent quite a lot of time with leaders, chief executives, portfolio holders, just trying to make sure that we see the world in the same way and that we're trying to meet the same objectives. I retired, actually. Well, I'm semi-retired now. I retired from my leisure career in June of 22. So I now do some work, some consultancy work, but very, very part-time. And I'm an elected trustee of Cinspur, and I do some voluntary work as well, which is really important to me. My interest in governance and community-biased organisations and really what makes them effective started, I suppose, looking back to about 2011, when I was chief exec at Halo, and we were dealing at that time, and some people may remember this, but we were dealing at that time with the impact of the banking crash and the fact that it took 2 or 3 years from 2008 to find its way into local government. And Halo Leisure in Herefordshire, very rural location, so not many chimney pots. And we had a reasonable sized subsidy at that time. And my concern as the chief exec, working with predominantly my chairman, but also the wider board, was what is the impact of this governance, of this financial crash going to be into local authorities, and what impact might that then have on our organisation? And I had some very, very able people who were able to look at issues around the commercial side of things and programming and so on. But my concern as the chief exec was really around what I suspected might be a problem, in that if the subsidy is removed, because that's the obvious impact, that was then going to drive us down a route where we wouldn't be true to our objects and our values. As a social enterprise, we're working with hard to reach groups. The social responsibility that we had was really, really important. And my concern was that if we were pressed into a real hard commercial fight for our lives, to be honest with you, the things that we held dear and valuable to us might actually be prejudiced. So I started reading, and I started looking at theoretical elements of governance, and I apologise in advance if occasionally I lapse into academic speak. Just wave or throw something at the screen or something, and I'll try and get back out of that mindset. But I started to read, and some of the things that I had felt and sensed in my professional life really came to light, came out of the paper when I was reading journals and academic work. And I'm sad to say that well, I'm not sad actually, but it actually I became a bit obsessive about it, and I ended up writing a doctoral thesis on effective governance and social enterprises. So I was taking forward some of the theories and discussing that through research with colleagues who worked in the leisure trust sector. And I found it really, really fascinating. I've had experience as a chairman of a board and working on a board as well. So I've sort of seen it from both sides, from the governance element from the board and also as the chief executive. That's a bit about me. Systems thinking. I'm a big supporter of whole systems thinking. I'm not by any means an expert, and I'm sure there are many people in the room today who will know more about that than I do. But whilst it's more complex, to me, it offers a maturity of thought and action which is appropriate for the challenges of modern public services. There's a clear move, I think, across public services to work more collaboratively and to see how we can work together, so that we're addressing the big issues of the day and things, of course, like health inequalities, well-being, climate change, and thinking about governance, how organizations govern, reflecting this collaboration, can be really quite challenging. But I think it's critically important if we're going to resist the drive to protect our own part of the system. So governance, I think, is an important part in that whole wheel. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and all of the constituent parts that form the jigsaw puzzle have to come together to create the picture that we want to see. And governance is one of those jigsaw pieces. I'm going to talk to you and share some slides in a minute around what I found and what I learned and what I think. And I'm not in any way suggesting that I'm an expert in governance. Governance is really, really wide. So it covers things like, obviously, articles of association. There's the whole legal element to governance. My focus, which I'll explain a bit more about in a minute, is around the composition of boards, the focus that boards have, and the dynamics that boards encourage and work within. So it's a niche element. So I'm afraid those of you who were expecting to hear about articles of association and how good board meetings are run and codes of conduct and EDI policies and all that sort of thing, I'm afraid you may be slightly disappointed. The hour is designed to be reflective and hopefully thought-provoking. I feel we don't get enough time to just pause and consider and have these reflective moments. Everything is driving us down a route of short-term operationalized thinking. I feel it's about today, tomorrow, and next week, where we make a difference is not only in dealing with short-term, perhaps crisis issues, but recognizing there is a bigger picture and we're working towards that. So I'm really happy to share my experience. If I can work the machine, I will now share some slides with you. And I'd be really, really interested to hear your thoughts at the end, and if I can, answer any questions. So if you just give me 1 minute, let me just bring this up. Okay, should be coming up any minute. Is that, can you see the slides? Somebody could let me know, that would be helpful. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, good. Right, so here we go. A little bit more about systems thinking. As I say, I feel that we tend to work in a very operationalized way, and that can become habit forming, and I think it's unhealthy, but I understand the reasons why we do that. But the strategic context that we're all working in is uncertain, it's ambiguous, and it's complex. And I think recognizing that from the start is important. And what's really important is the extent to which you and others as leaders can thrive in a world where we see partnership working and a series of interdependencies as being really, really important, rather than competition and our own organizational self-interest. And I think it's natural that we do that. You know, people would say, well, we are paid to do what's right for our organizations, but in terms of systems thinking, that collaboration and a recognition of interdependency is really, really important, because people will typically focus their attention on the parts of the system that they know best, that they're most interested in perhaps, or that are most visible from their own chair. That's just natural and that's human. So seeing the larger system and being able to build a shared understanding of what are complex problems and developing sustainable solutions from that is really, really important. We could do 50 different slides around systems thinking, but those are the things that particularly drew my attention when we're looking at governance. So here's what I found, and here's what I think. Governance, which obviously is linked to leadership, in charitable, social, volunteer, community-biased organizations, governance is a critical competency. But good governance may be less valuable when we compare it to commercial or specialist financial skills. So it can be not forgotten, but it can be less important. And that's particularly true, I think, in good times or in times of stress. I mentioned my experience in Halo, where my concern from a governance perspective, when we had a crisis or an impending crisis, was that we would be driven down the specialist financial commercial skills, and we wouldn't therefore be focusing on what was important to us and our values. So in times of stress, we go to those harder skills, but also in good times. There's something I've come to refer to as comfy slippers. You know, we get into a real comfortable situation when things are going really well. We have a board meeting on a regular basis. We see the same people. We see the same agenda. We have the same generally good information. We look at the same reports. So that can be a problem, I think. And when it goes wrong, and you'll be familiar with some of these examples, boy, does it go wrong. So the Enron scandal, for those who may remember, it was basically about the management team buying electricity, gas in advance, oil, for their own personal benefit. So they were taking their bonuses now, and if it all went wrong, the decisions that they were making all went wrong in 10 years' time, well, they wouldn't be around. They'd be on their yacht in the south of France. Nick Leeson, we know, had so much freedom and was so uncontrolled in Barings Bank that he effectively brought the bank down. So where was the governance there in oversight terms? And I suspect that Carillion may also, the collapse of Carillion may also be largely due to governance or concerns or problems with governance. I won't go through these. I'll just leave them there on the screen for you to have a read through. But as I was doing my study and talking to people, I had a notepad next to me, and I was thinking, well, what are the principles and what are we actually trying to achieve here? And these were some of the things that people said to me, or that struck me particularly as I was going through. And it's good to have an anchor, isn't it? So if we're thinking about what we really believe in terms of governance and what we want, these were some of the things that struck me. Again, perhaps at the end you can let me know whether you think that they are relevant, appropriate, important, or not. But those were the things that I felt were the right principles, the things that we need to be working towards. Now, I wanted to just spend a little bit of time, if you'll allow me, just to go through the background of the theories that I was particularly looking at. You know, so when I was looking in management journals, when I was looking at academic studies, there were 6 main theories that I felt underpinned effective governance, and I'll just run through them for you very briefly. and talk a little bit about the behaviours and the constructs that sit behind them. So the first is agency theory. And the principle of agency theory is that owners and managers are likely to have different interests. The owners of the company want to see a return on their investment. It's very, very private sector led, this theory. The managers may have different interests to owners. They may want to do what's right for them rather than what's right for the owners and for the organisation. As I say, it's private sector led. The Enron failure, I think, is an example of what happened here, because managers will or could act in their own best interests. But it's not all bad news. There's some really important elements of here in this theory in effective governance. So the function of the board within an agency lens is to control managers. It's about close monitoring, compliance, conformance, critical reviews and checks. Are the managers doing what is right for the organisation? That is the main focus of the board. We're going to check and make sure that everything is being done as we want, rather than the potential of the managers doing what's right for them. So that's agency theory. The next theory that I stumbled across was stewardship theory, and this is probably the opposite to agency theory, because it assumes that managers want to do a good job. It assumes that they will act as effective stewards of resources and that the management and shareholders are seen as partners. You may well be thinking, well, that sounds pretty good and that's how we work, and hopefully that's the case. So the function of the board with a stewardship lens is primarily strategic. Working with senior managers, the board work with senior managers to add value to top level decisions so that they can improve organisational performance. So that's number two. Number three is resource dependency. And you can see the systems link particularly clearly here, because the main focus of resource dependency is that organisations recognise that they are working collaboratively and interdependently with their environment. So that drives great benefits from accessing human or financial capital and the resources of others. The board focus is making those really positive, influential links with other organisations, maintaining good relations, and accessing any knowledge, skills, experience, resources. Really important, I think, theoretical underpinning for systems and good governance. So in the leisure trust world, we would find that maybe directors of public health or directors of the voluntary sector, other community biased leaders would come and join the board of leisure trusts, and vice versa. And that gave us that real depth of experience, skills, knowledge, and also created, hopefully, an advocacy role for the organisation in the wider community. The fourth theory is democratic theory, and as you can see, this is where the board members are a lay or non-professional board, because they're elected. They will represent different interests from different organisations or different sections within the organisation, but they are elected. So the focus of the board is to set overall policy and choose between differing groups. But critically, expertise is not a central requirement. So people are not elected onto a board because they may have a skill or experience in human resources or legal or financial. They are there and elected purely on the basis that they represent the organisation. So the organisation that I work for, GLL, I was saying, it operates in this way. People are elected onto the board irrespective of their skills or knowledge. And that's not to say that they weren't a great board, they were, but it isn't a requirement in order to join the board to have those skills or knowledge. Second to last one is stakeholder theory. And this is where organizations are responding to broader social interests. Again, they're not required to have a particular skill set, but they do represent a range of different groups. So the board is elected on that basis. And school governing bodies are perhaps a good example of this, where you might have a school governing body that has parents, representatives of the LEA, teachers, or indeed the church if it's a church school. So if any of you are school governors or have been school governors, then you might be looking back and saying, okay, right, I can see how that operated now, and that's related back to stakeholder theory. And the final one, and you know, say apologies for the big words in this, that the managerial hegemony, that bit of good old PhD language there. This is where the management team rule the roost. The board no longer effectively controls the organization. Management absolutely dominant, albeit that they're acting within agreed policies. So this is where, and you know, you may know organizations who operate like this, where the chief executive or the head of service, whoever it is, the head of the paid service rules the roost, and they'll say, okay, right, board, we're going to meet on a monthly basis. Come in, sit down, here's some paperwork. I'm going to tell you what I think you need to know. And then thank you very much. I'll let you know if I need anything else, and we'll see you in a month's time. So that's managerial hegemony, real strong executive control. Now, starting to then make sense of this a little bit, my view is that when we have a community biased organization that's operating in a whole system approach, whilst they're all important and they all have a place, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, when you take them individually, they only illuminate one aspect of the board's role. And in reality, it's not an either or. We don't choose agency or managerial hegemony or resource dependency. There are tensions and continually changing circumstances that we're all working within, such that if you take them together, they offer a more realistic view of how boards can work if they are to be successful. So it's not one or the other. We don't allow ourselves to fall into the trap of comfy slippers or crisis management of saying we're only going to follow one of those theories. We need to bring them all into play. And recognizing that there are a number of tensions, and I experienced this when I was a chief executive, and I experience these tensions now as chairman of a board. So when we're looking at all of the different theories and the different behaviours, the first tension is that board members have to act as representatives of a particular group, so stakeholder or democratic, but they're also experts charged with driving performance. So that's quite difficult. If you are not skilled in a certain area, you are there on the board because you are a representative, it will be more difficult for you to drive performance of the organization. The second tension is between driving that performance, but also ensuring conformance. So, and this can happen between board meetings. It can happen in a board meeting where the board will have to say, part of what we're doing and saying at this particular moment is strategic, stewardship based. We're driving performance. That's the focus, making good decisions, working with management, but also ensuring conformance. So we have to flip and say, how do I know as a board member, how do I know that what you're telling me is important? And how do I know what you're not telling me, which might be important? Some of you may remember the Donald Rumsfeld view, where he used to say there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And this probably fits in with the last two. There's a known unknown. I know that there may be something that I don't know, but I don't know what it is. So how do you get that balance between driving performance but also ensuring conformance. Particularly difficult with a volunteer group, I have found, my own personal view. And then the final tension is between controlling and supporting management. How do you create those bonds so that it is acceptable, understood, recognized, even valued, to recognize that the relationship will be between controlling and supporting management? Now, I felt, my research told me and my experience told me, that these tensions are there. They will always be there. Thinking they're not there is naive. It's far better to recognize them and address them. Because if you can create what I think are constructive tensions rather than destructive tensions, then you can say, look, we know, the board and the chief exec, we know that there are going to be times when the chief exec is going to have to step up and lead us forward and say, I'm the professional, this is a technical issue, you need to do this, please follow me. And there are times when the chairman or the board will be able to say, sorry, no, we want a bit more information on this. You need to tell us a little bit more. And by recognizing that at the start, everybody feels that they're more comfortable in addressing those tensions. They become constructive tensions when they happen. So I'm a bit of a visual thinker, and when I was sitting writing up my thesis in a darkened room, mostly with a large vat of coffee, occasionally with a bottle of red wine, I was trying to say, well, okay, how do I conceptualize this? And I came up thinking about these theories with a very basic studio mixing desk. So if you have that picture in your mind, and this mixing desk, you're in a recording studio, a very small mixing desk, but it has 6 faders on it. And each of those faders represents one of the theories that we've just been through. So the first thing is, you can see that there are 6, not 7, not 5. You know there are 6, so you know that they're there, and that's the first point. The second point is that you understand what each one does. So knowing that and being then proactive, which I'll come on to in a minute, you are then able to control, to proactively manage the work that you're doing by moving faders up or down, given any of the circumstances that you're focusing. So there may be a time where in the organization's in the year or in the issues that the organization is dealing with, that the board feel they need to push up the agency fader. You know, we need a little bit more on assurance, compliance, making sure that we know what's going on. Equally, there may be times where you say, no, actually, we now need a bit more on the stewardship side. This is now, we're in a much more strategic phase. So down comes the agency fader, up goes the stewardship. Or resource dependency, you might be saying, we need to be thinking about how we really demonstrate our value in an interdependent, collaborative forum or ecosystem. So we need to really push that fader up or down. Sorry, I'm probably laboring the point, but that's the view I've come to in recognizing the earlier point about each of them individually won't work, that it actually requires a bit of all of them, but that needs to be fluid. And sorry, this is a bit of a busy slide, but this is the outcome, really, I suppose, of my thinking on this. Some of this table we've been through. So we've got the 6 theories across the top. The first column across the top, the grey one on theory, just gives an overview of what those theories are. And just pausing before we go into the next 3 areas, I said at the beginning of the talk that I felt that you could cut this in a way of layering in 3 elements that would allow you to move those faders, to act responsibly, to be dynamic in how you're running the organization. And I distilled them down into the composition of the board. So who sits on the board? what focus there is that the board has on any given issue. So what are they looking at and why? And the dynamics of how board members work, not only between themselves, but particularly with their management teams, and also to a certain extent in the wider community. And what I tried to do in this slide then in the composition, focus and dynamics is just to outline what the specific constructs and behaviours of each of the theories might bring when we're thinking about the composition or focus or dynamics. So in some of the organisations that I'm working with, this is a bit of a key slide, really. We come back to this every now and again because it helps us move those faders around when we're thinking about the issues that we're looking at going forwards. So that's the sense making. It's a recognition of the 6 theories, and then overlaying on top of that the how element. So how are we going to govern? And that comes to the composition and the focus and the dynamics. That was the conclusion that I'd come to. Just a couple more slides now. So the opinion is that leaders can better understand and improve their governance by being more proactive and have an informed set of practices and behaviours that are understood and recognised from the get-go. Everybody, I feel, on the board, I think it's helpful if people on the board understand these behaviours and where they come from at the beginning. But one of the most important words in that sentence is proactive. My research and my own experience suggested to me that governance, particularly the comfy slippers governance, can carry on ad infinitum. And if there isn't a crisis or a challenge or something very significant, then we end up being reactive. It's the same people that talk about the same things on the same frequency. So proactivity is important. The other conclusion that I come to was that strategic planning, such as it happens, and there is a lot of really good work that happens around business planning, strategic thinking, is not linked really in any meaningful way to governance. So organizations will be reviewing their strategic plans and their business plans, but do they at the same time and as a part of that process say, we must now also reflect on governance? Let's get that sense-making slide out. Let's get this idea of John's faders out as well. What are we facing? What's good? What's bad? And how should governance be a key element in delivering on that, either managing challenges or seizing opportunities? I felt that didn't happen. And finally, as hopefully is apparent, I really feel that governance is an important part of that jigsaw that we're looking at, because governance controls everything. Governance will manage crises, governance will set strategies, governance is about delivering on priorities, governance is about culture and all of the things that we value. And if we are looking through a systems lens, really recognizing that we are working with others collaboratively, that this is about an interdependency of organizations, then of course governance has to play a really important part in that. So I've come to the end of the slide deck. I will endeavour now to stop sharing. Hopefully that has been achieved. I can see a few people. I'm pleased to say everybody still looks awake. This is good news. So that's my thinking. That's where I'm at. I really appreciate any thoughts or questions. They can come in the chat, or you can put your hand up, or however you want. If you don't want to, then again, completely understand. But it would be lovely to hear what you think. Does it resonate with you? Okay, put a thumbs up if it resonates with you. I can see a few thumbs. Great. Stuart, Laura, Jodie, yes, thank you. As we went through that, were you in your minds thinking, yeah, actually, this is how we operate, or I know an organization that operates in this way? Again, we can do thumbs up. Great. Thank you, Stuart. Okay. Well, did you have any questions? Said, shaking his head. Yes, Tabitha.
Hi, I'll volunteer. I'm a program manager in TAF, so governance tends to sit kind of more in my bag, and I have an interest in it. I've done studies in it, and albeit a long time ago. But just picking up on kind of the theoretical bit, I guess. So you have those 6 theories, and yes, absolutely understand the concept of varying the application of them as circumstances change. A conceptual question, I guess. So how do you govern that governance change and shift happens? Do you have almost like an offshoot of a board to effectively monitor that your board is adjusting as circumstances change? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, great question, Tabitha. Thank you. I think it's led by the chair and the chief executive. It's a proactive thing, and the point I was making about it being linked to strategic planning is really important. So when you get to that point in the year, might be annually, might be quarterly, whenever it is, but when you have that pause and consider, everybody stop. What's important? Where are we? Where are we going? What are the challenges? Where are the risks? That's the point at which I think the chair and the chief executive, in a recognized, accepted way, will say, so what does this mean for our governance? That's the first point I'd say. The second point, which is related, I hope, is that there is a cycle that you can apply. So if you do an organizational self-assessment and you have a series of prompts and questions and quotes that relate to each of the theories, then you can ask yourself a number of really open questions. Do we really know, under agency theory, do we really know how the organisation is performing? How can we confirm that what we're hearing as board members is what we need to hear? Because we only have a certain amount of time. So you can have a series of those prompts. When you get round to doing it fairly frequently, then it becomes the norm. It's actually quite energizing. It could be done through a board away day. There are lots of different ways. But it does need to be led by both the chair and the chief exec, is my view.
And how do chairs and chief execs typically take challenge like that? Because I'm anticipating that there will be boards where the chair and chief exec are quite kind of autocratic, and board might want slightly more democratic process. So how can that be encouraged?
Well, I think if there is a discussion around a bit like we've had today, which is, look, here's some thoughts. We need to review our governance regularly. We need to think about how we do that, why we do it, what's important. Then the board and the chief exec can understand all of the different behaviours and so on, and then from that point onwards, then go ahead and do the sort of self-assessment or the diagnostic. I suppose if there is a really autocratic chair or chief executive who is saying it's kind of my way or the highway, then there's an opportunity for some mentoring or external support to come in and just say, well, there are different ways of thinking about this.
Excellent, thank you.
I think Jodie's next.
I think my question might be quite similar to Tabitha's. It was going to be around how you might build capacity and capability of the board members to be able to operate in a way across those 6 dials, and and to fulfill different functions that might be required at different times, and then how that might shift attitudes, behaviours, and ways of thinking, I guess. But I think if you kind of touched on that really with your answer to Tabitha's question.
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. Great question again. But I think it starts with a willingness to accept that we don't know everything about governance, and secondly, that we want to govern well and proactively. And once those cornerstones are there, then there is a cycle. I say, probably just reflecting a little bit on what I was saying to Tabitha. There is a cycle which says, okay, we're going into this eyes open. We're going to ask ourselves some fairly tough questions. So we'll do that self-assessment. Coming out of that would then be, for want of a better expression, an improvement plan. So here are some things that we need to do and say and think differently. Then there is a way of measuring that. So in a year's time, let's look back at our improvement plan. How are we doing? So this is a board and senior management team exercise. And then to repeat that on a regular basis, ideally when you are reviewing your strategy. So it's not seen as something exclusive to that. And my experience is that actually people are reasonable, and they're on boards, particularly volunteer boards, because they want to be there. They want to do a good job. So their mindset is to start with, to say, look, I want to know how I can do things better. How do I know what I don't know, and so on. So people generally go into it positively. Giving them a toolkit to follow is a helpful way of doing that. And then repeating that every year so it becomes the norm is really useful. Okay. Were there any other questions? I can see there's one in the chat. Really, so thank you. How do you think that leaders could communicate shifts in leadership strategy, the theory, to their organizations? Should they? How is this communicated whilst ensuring employee stability? Well, in relation to should they, I think absolutely yes. I think that governance is dynamic. I feel a real risk that governance can become static, and I don't find that helpful. I don't think that's a good thing to do or to allow to happen. Leadership theory and strategy is probably slightly different. I said there is definitely, thinking of a Venn diagram, there is leadership and governance, and obviously there's an overlap there. But I'd probably come back to the points that I made to Tabitha and Jodie, really, which is about being dynamic and proactive, finding ways of creating conversations and systems and ways of working which allow you to be able to critically but confidently explore what you're doing and how you're doing it, and having the maturity at the end of that process to be able to say, we're good at this, we're great at that, but there are a couple of things we need to do better and differently. And it is very energizing. Some of you, I'm sure many of you, are working within boards where you do operate in that way, and it is really energizing when you can go into a board meeting as a chief executive and or as a chairman and know that you can ask constructively critical, searching questions. Then that feels, to me at least, it feels far better than either saying, well, I don't really understand this, but I don't think I want to ask the question, or being bombastic. Neither of those helps. Okay. So we're doing okay for time. We can either we can hold it there if you wanted to. Through Beth, I'm very happy to pick up any questions that you might have when you've thought about it. I'm guessing, Beth, obviously the session is being recorded, so that will be sent out to people. Getting a nod from Beth. So so if there are any queries, Beth, I'm very happy for you to share my contact details, email and phone number and so on. And if you did, when it's settled a bit, have any thoughts or questions, and I'd love some challenges as well. You know, it's a constant learning, evolutionary thing. If you think, John, you're way off here, you know, you've not got this right, or we have had a different experience, I'd love to hear that as well. So contact details have gone in the chat. Thank you, Beth. Unless there's anything else. Oh, we have, yes, Laura.
John, just a quick one from me. So you said about, I'm just thinking, is your paper available for us to view and have a look at, the thesis, or not?
I think it is actually, yes. If you really have difficulty sleeping, Laura, I can highly recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's I've studied at the University of Birmingham, so I think it will be accessible there. The only reason I'm slightly querying it is and I appreciate I'm amongst friends here, that there's a commercial element to it. It does form the basis. Some of the things we were talking about around supported diagnostic work, that first part is something that I do a little bit of on a professional basis. So the university did say they'd hold it confidentially for a while. I think that may have passed, but yes, I'm sure you'll be able to get hold of it.
I'm studying at the moment, you see, and elements of the modules that I'm doing are around strategic positioning and governance. We're leading on a piece of work in Blackpool where we're kind of getting started and getting set up and making sure that we've got the correct governance in place. And again, it was just really interesting to hear the 6 different theories and the approach that you have kind of highlighted. So yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Yes. Lauren.
Hi there. Yeah, sorry, I missed the start, so you may have covered it, but the 6 theories that you talked through, and when you were talking about them, often we're referring to a board with a CEO and a chair. A lot of the work we do locally is through kind of less formal structures, so like leadership groups, or we're all working towards a common goal, like a strategy, but there's not really those formalized roles, and I'm just wondering if those same principles apply to other partnership groups that don't necessarily have a chair and a CEO, and they may be more flattened in their hierarchy. Does that make sense?
It does, Lauren. Thank you for your question. I think it does. Yes, I think when people get together in whatever shape or form to discuss where an organization is and how it can manage threats and seize opportunities, then the behaviors, the focus that we talked about, the dynamics, and to a certain extent the composition and the elements that sit within each of those theories will also be relevant. But it would be really interesting perhaps to get your thoughts on that at some time.
I guess because the partnerships that we work within, they're not really, we don't have boards or organizations in that same way. A lot of it is just partnership, interested people coming together around around the work. So there isn't really an organization at the heart of it. It's a collective. So yeah, just wondering how those change. You said that it's often the chair or the CEO that will initiate looking at those kind of 6 theories. But yeah, if there isn't there's always a chair usually. I take that, but there isn't one organization. It's often lots, and they're all public services usually. So it's just.
So there will be somebody who within the group will be saying, this is who we are, the vision or the purpose, vision, mission, values. There will be somebody who oversees that, I'm sure, or it may be a group of people. But if you think about that sense-making slide and perhaps have a look at that at those columns and the rows across, which explain a little bit about the behaviors and how organizations think, then I feel where people come together and talk through what the organization is there to achieve, that reflective element, and it is a purposeful, dynamic activity, that people should, I hope, be able to get some value from understanding what they need to do less of, what they need to do more of.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think I can see any other hands up. And there's nothing else in the chat. So so Beth, if you're okay, we're about 7 or 8 minutes ahead of schedule, which is unheard of for me. I'm usually rushing the last few slides. So so perhaps I can just say in finishing, thank you ever so much for allowing me to talk about something that's a passion. I don't think it's an unhealthy passion yet, but it is a passion, and I hope that it's been valuable. And I would really welcome your thoughts, good, bad, or indifferent, in the feedback form that Beth explained about earlier, because everybody's learning, aren't they? It's a constant process. So we'll call it a day there. Thank you again, really appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing from you should you want to do so. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.